into our Human Ecology project. Bill and I are thrilled today to welcome the most amazing friend and advisory board member, Dr. Tim Radak. Tim has a master's and doctorate in public health nutrition from the leading University of Vegetarian Science and Nutrition, CEPH, accredited Loma Linda University. Now, Tim has an incredible presentation to share with us all today. It's very exciting, and he's so well connected with many of our friends and colleagues around the world, particularly working with the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, the McDougall Programme, and so much more, which Tim will share with you. So, Tim, a big warm welcome.
Thank you, and really great to have this opportunity to present some of my, well, basically what I'm passionate about is optimal vegan nutrition. So really excited and nice to see you both.
Fantastic. Mr. Tara.
And you too. And you know, I was looking over what you're going to present to us, and boy, do a lot of people need this. You know, it's amazing, and I know that you addressed the issue so well. There are so many people that have changed their diet, and you've gone plant-based, gone vegan, and they're still not getting it. They're still not getting nourished well. So we all look forward to this, and I really hope all of our students tune into this and really eat it up.
Okay.
Wonderful. Yeah, and when I finish, if there's anything you feel that I might have left out that we could discuss a little bit more, please let me know. But I really tried to do a deep dive into the topic and really, you know, kind of give a nice comprehensive view, over 150 sources and growing. So thank you.
Fantastic. We're blessed indeed. Thank you so much, Tim.
You bet. I'll share my screen and we can start our talk.
Perfect.
Fantastic.
Okay, does that look okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. Fantastic.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again for the opportunity to present this really important research, not just from an individual standpoint, but from a global standpoint as well. Diets, as you both know, affect so much more than just our own personal nutrition. But personal nutrition is very important, and it's definitely one of the cores to start and build as people decide to transition to a more plant-based eating style. And so what I chose for the title was Achieving Optimal Vegan Diets. And I chose that because there are a lot of challenges inherent in shifting to any kind of dietary pattern, and vegan diets are no different. Essentially, there's always challenges, and some of those challenges are macro challenges that the environment, for example, marketing, or the fact that supermarkets have 70% of the grocery aisles being unhealthy, and it can really set up some challenges to really achieving or striving for optimal vegan diet. So I'm going to list a little bit of historical to set kind of the time frame, and then advance into what some of the benefits are for those that follow vegan diets, and then talk about some of the caveats, and end with some suggestions and tips. So again, thank you for the opportunity to present this. It's also a real honor to be an advisory board member for the Human Ecology Project. Marlene talked a little bit about my background. The only thing I wanted to mention is the reason why I chose Loma Linda University. Really, the first and foremost research from an epidemiology standpoint on vegetarian diets took place at Loma Linda University, just east of Los Angeles in California. And so when I was making my decisions to pursue graduate work and to try to work towards becoming a leader with an expert focus on plant-based diets and nutrition, I really felt Loma Linda was the place to go. And, you know, it dates back from the late 50s, early 60s, when the first Adventist mortality study came out. And then later on, as most of us know, the Adventist health studies that really put vegetarian research on the map and started to legitimize this as a diet that actually promotes health and reduces chronic disease. So I did most of my education there, and then also went up to Northern California to University of California, Davis, to do some postdoctoral research at the Western Human Nutrition Research Center, which is a USDA research center housed at UC Davis. So I talked a little bit about the focus of my talk today. I just want to add that I have nothing to disclose. There's no finances or anything like that related in my talk. This is all something that I do in terms of research, just for the benefit of others. There's no financial gain at all from this. So I was talking earlier a little bit about setting a little bit of a historical time frame. And the article that I chose that really does a great job of this is an article by actually the chair of Loma Linda University's nutrition department, and who is also my chair for my dissertation at Loma Linda, Dr. Joan Sabate. And Dr. Sabate published this article, The Contribution of Vegetarian Diets to Health and Disease, a Paradigm Shift, back over 2 decades ago. But it's a seminal piece of research that I feel is worth noting and sharing to a wide audience, because it really helps us understand how we got to where we are now, because we've shifted from early research that suggested that vegetarian diets were deficient. Then we shifted over to adequacy, and now we're at an area where these diets are preventive in nature and also therapeutic. And there's lots of reasons why those changes took place. Some of them were just natural bias towards meatless diets. And so a lot of the research that came out, for example, were done by researchers that were not vegetarian and really felt that this is a hippie diet or an extreme diet. As this article, this little cartoon shows, that the perception was this is not something that is going to be normalized. And so there was a lot of bias towards these diets. And so back in the 1960s, this is a figure, if you look at the bold line here, this suggested that there was some risk of deficiencies for those that followed vegetarian diets, and those that followed omnivorous meat-based diets did not share that level of risk. And then when we went into the 1970s, those deficiencies started to mitigate somewhat. We've now introduced these diets as being perceived as optimal, but also some degree of risk of excess here. And then fast forward into the 1990s and the current stage, and now we see vegetarian vegan diets, as illustrated in the dark line here, as being optimal with very little risk for deficiencies and very little risk for excess. And conversely, we see meat-based omnivorous diets still within the margin of deficiency and excess. And when we talk about deficiency in terms of meat-based diets, as Dr. Sabate noted in his article, we're also talking about a phytochemical, phytonutrient deficiency, because those who follow vegetarian diets tend to have plentiful amounts of phytochemicals and phytonutrients, and those that follow meat-based diets do not. So I really felt this was important to kind of set the stage for summarizing the research that I'll present here in the next few slides, that really, beyond a shadow of a doubt, those that follow vegan diets, the research studies that look at these population groups tend to result in a significant reduction of disease and disease risk factors. And I won't go through each and every one of these. There's actually too many to list, but we now have 2 to 3 solid decades of research investigating plant-based diets. Some of the highlights certainly are less coronary heart disease and coronary heart disease mortality, less all-cause mortality, certainly less obesity. Those who follow vegetarian and vegan diets tend to have much more stable weight, and that's important because overweight or obesity has a whole host of risk factors for other diseases. Certainly those that follow these diets have more nutrient density, increased fiber intake, better inflammatory marker profiles. Um, you have things like similar bone health compared to omnivores, less incidence of hyper and hypothyroidism. I mean, the list goes on and on. Also, increase in longevity, highest disease-fighting biomarkers like phytochemicals and phytonutrients or antioxidants, as I was talking a little bit about before. And so the research shows that many benefits, but these benefits also can be applied from a therapeutic standpoint. So if patients or individuals have particular diseases or disease risk factors, they can mitigate or reduce those risks therapeutically by following a vegan diet. And so there's a whole host of examples here. One of the most interesting, I think, was Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn's study at the Cleveland Clinic, who actually took patients and put them on a vegan diet and was actually able to revert, not just mitigate, but reverse coronary heart disease. And if you ever look at the photos that show that, it's just remarkable the amount of change that can take place when individuals adopt a vegan diet, and the amount of change that can occur quickly. When I was at Dr. McDougall's 11-day program in Northern California, at the end of the 11 days, it was just remarkable to see the reduction in medications, the new lease on life that individuals and participants felt. And that's one of the reasons why one of the healthcare team members in the McDougall program is actually a psychologist or a therapist, because the changes are so profound that individuals often say, I didn't know we could feel like this. I just thought feeling unhealthy was just normal. And within 11 days, I actually realized what it feels like to have good health. And so these changes can occur very rapidly. Some more therapeutic uses: depression, osteoarthritis, migraines, rheumatoid arthritis. And then I'd like to spend a few slides talking about inflammatory markers, because as these two systematic reviews show that looked at vegetarian and vegan diets, these dietary plans have significant reductions in inflammatory and immune biomarkers. And that's important because so many diseases and chronic diseases, as you can see in this little pictograph here, are highly and strongly associated with inflammation. Just looking at vegan diets in particular, just one example of the increase in fiber intake. And of course, any animal products contain zero fiber, but fiber is plentiful in vegan diets. And one of the reasons why fiber is so important is because when you get into the microbiome and the gut, fiber is converted to short chain fatty acids, which in turn get converted to butyrate, which are anti-inflammatory. And we even have special microbes that break down the cell walls of fiber and plant products and release a whole host of phytochemicals, which in and of themselves also have anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. And when you take a look at some of the top anti-inflammatory items that are out there, this was a study that evaluated 6,500 individual studies and found that the top anti-inflammatory items, as you can see here on the screen, many of these constitute or make up a plant-based vegan diet.
Yeah.
And conversely, the pro-inflammatory items like saturated fat and cholesterol are derived from omnivorous diets. And this is why studies like this one come out proclaiming that there's a worse inflammatory profile in omnivores compared to vegetarians in the gut. And this is why when I talk to people or patients about plant-based vegan diets, I consider a well-planned vegan diet to be the anti-inflammatory diet for those reasons. So it's worth spending a little bit of time understanding the importance of inflammation because it's, again, associated with so many chronic diseases. Shifting over to what constitutes a well-planned vegan diet, certainly the sentence in the green pretty much caps it all: a variety of minimally processed whole food, nutrient-dense fruits, vegetables, beans, legumes, grains, nuts and seeds, and minimally processed foods. And variety and diversity in that diet will help make sure and ensure that your macronutrients like protein and minerals like calcium and iron and zinc and other vitamins are met. And it's important to highlight the importance of vitamin B12. We used to be able to easily get vitamin B12 through water as well as through the bacteria that was on fruits and vegetables. Obviously, today we drink water that's been purified and cleansed, as is produce, so we lost that ability to be able to get that benefit of vitamin B12. So it's important to either have a fortified source of vitamin B12 in your products, for example, Bragg's nutritional yeast here, or soy milks or non-dairy milks are good sources. But it is important to ensure a reliable source of vitamin B12. Iodine is another item that's also important, and it's very largely dependent on what the soil of where vegetables are grown. So because of that variation, one of the easiest ways to get iodine is actually through seaweeds and sea vegetables. And they're so packed with iodine because they absorb that iodine that's in the seawater that they're very concentrated sources. So we don't really want to overdo it in a very small amount. You can even sprinkle just a little bit of dulse, for example, and you'll get more than your recommended daily allowance of iodine. Also important to avoid iodized salt if you wanted to get iodine from that source. Obviously, we know sodium has some significant serious health effects, so we want to avoid getting our iodine from table salt. Next is vitamin D. Obviously, the main source is sunlight, and that's dependent on where you're at in terms of latitude as well as season, but also the cultural ways that we live our lives today. When we go outside, we tend to wear a lot of clothes. We tend to work indoors around four walls, and so obtaining sufficient vitamin D is important. So we want to make sure that we have exposure outside to be able to obtain that free source of vitamin D that's synthesized from UV sunlight. Next is essential fatty acids. This is such a controversial topic, and it doesn't need to be. It's actually quite simple. Really, the focus should be more on omega-3 fatty acids rather than omega-3 fatty acids, and I'll explain why in just a minute. And it's very easy to make sure your omega-6 fatty acids are in reasonable levels, because when you limit refined oils in processed products where the bulk of omega-6 fatty acids come from, then you're automatically ensuring that omega-3 incorporation in the body will occur. And a lot of researchers posit omega-3 fatty acids to be the angel and omega-6 fatty acids to be the devil, and it's simply not the case. We need both. They are both essential. And the interesting focus is really on the end product of omega-6, which is arachidonic acid. That's where pro-inflammation molecules occur. And if you have plant-based sources of omega-6, which we call linoleic acid, very little of linoleic acid actually gets to that end product of arachidonic acid. It's actually omnivores that need to be concerned, because animal products are a preformed source of arachidonic acid. So this is actually more important for those that follow meat-based diets. And to illustrate just how widely spread in the plant kingdom omega-3 fatty acids are, I put together the sample one-day meal to illustrate how easy it is to obtain your omega-3 fatty acids without needing walnuts, chia, flax, algae, or oil. Certainly those are concentrated sources. But I wanted to just illustrate that in your normal everyday dietary sources, you can exceed the amount of recommended intakes. And so if looking at breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, this total meal clocks in at 2.2 grams of omega-3 fatty acids, and females are estimated to need only about 1.1 gram and males at about 1.6 grams. So a sample diet, a daily diet like this easily exceeds that. And I wanted to emphasize that because not everybody realizes that pumpkin seeds or wheat bread or brown rice or kidney beans and legumes are an excellent source of omega-3 fatty acids, and it's often overlooked. I wanted to talk a little bit about why variety and diversity is so important. To give you an example, in our intestinal immune cells, there's specific individual receptors for proteins that are only able to be unlocked from specific phytochemicals. So you can look at this as sort of a lock and key mechanism. And for example, cruciferous vegetables really are a key that unlocks these specific areas that enhance and open up immune molecules. And so you can actually make a case that green vegetables like broccoli or cauliflower are really essential in the diet because our gut actually has receptors that really are only opened up by these specific vegetables. And Dr. Greger over at Nutrition Facts does a wonderful job of illustrating this research, and that's what this link is and what this pictograph is. The New and Enlightened Kind diet provided this how to build a meal, and I absolutely love this picture because it just amplifies the color and the richness and the diversity of what a well-planned vegan diet can look like. Just fantastic. So we know what constitutes a well-planned diet. Let's shift over to what constitutes a poorly planned diet and what some of those caveats are that can get in the way of people shifting to or currently following a vegan diet can run into. And certainly vitamin B12, as I was mentioning, is a very important micronutrient, and several studies show that the levels of intake and status are not where they should be. So really need to emphasize a reliable, steady source of B12. There's also just about every junk food out there has been converted to a vegan version, whether that's Beyond Fried Chicken, or whether it's ice cream or cheesecake or margarines or Kraft single cheeses. Literally everything has been veganized. And I'm not being the vegan military police here saying that you can't have any of these, but they need to be taken in the context of an overall diverse and rich whole food plant-based diet. Many of the research studies are suggesting that that's actually not taking place, and that we really need to use these more as a transitional reward or a treat. You know, when I was growing up as a kid, the trip to McDonald's before I became a vegetarian or to go out to get pizza was an absolute treat. It wasn't done on a regular basis, and it was very infrequent, and it was something that we could look forward to. And it wasn't in our freezer, and it wasn't in our refrigerator, and the access was much different. Now, in our current culture, everything has been flipped upside down. It's all too easy to order this. You don't even need to leave your home. You can have somebody deliver this from a fast food restaurant for you, literally not needing to lift a finger or expend a single calorie to get them. So these types of junk food items need to be, that's something that needs to be aware of. And some of these are actually addictive in nature, as I'll talk about in a little bit. Also, there's been a large introduction of meat analogs or plant-based meats that are replicating regular animal meats. And again, these should be considered to be used as a transitional item or a treat. Overall, they are still healthier than what they're replacing. There were some clinical trials that actually put individuals who were consuming meat-based products over to some of the meat analogs and then switched them back in what we call a crossover study. And the cardiovascular disease risk factors like LDL cholesterol did come down. Metabolites like trimethyl amino oxidase in the gut were reduced in those that were consuming meat-based alternatives. So overall, they're still healthier, but they still contain things like that they're high in sodium. So they want to be used in a way that's more of a treat or as a transition to a fully whole foods plant-based diet. The picture here of coconut oil, I put that there because it's also not as easy just to assume that if you pick a vegan product that it's automatically going to be healthier. This product, coconut oil, actually turns out to be higher in saturated fat than butter. So we do have to read the labels and make ourselves aware that not every product is to be assumed healthy just because it has a vegan stamp on it. There's also a few other things to pay attention to, and one of them is the psychological stage or readiness to make any change. Diet is obviously a large, significant change in many people's lives, and the stage of readiness, which I'll talk about a little bit later with a psychological model, is important because if someone wants to make this change, but they're not quite ready or they don't have the tools, it doesn't matter how many facts or brochures or data that you provide, they're not likely to succeed. And then also social determinants of health and health equity. If you look at those that are living in lower social economic profiles or areas of urban states, for example, the plentifulness of processed foods, the deficiency or availability of fresh produce, all should be taken into consideration when someone's adopting over to a plant-based diet. And you can see this picture here just shows what we're up against in terms of our food culture and our food environment. Just another slide that shows we don't see a lot of billboards here in the US and probably also in the UK highlighting broccoli or produce, but we see a lot of foods that are convenience and highly processed and which are generally unhealthy for us. This is an example of processed foods there in the UK, actually, and many of these could be considered vegan, but they're also highly processed and, again, are not necessarily something that should be eaten in large quantities. So understanding the previous diet before someone makes a switch to a plant-based diet, I think is very important. There's been some studies to support this too. Here in the US, the percentage of ultra-processed foods, I was just talking earlier about processed foods, but ultra-processed foods, which are literally in a lab engineered to be high in fat, high in oil, high in salt, and high in sugar, make up a huge amount of daily intake of calories. And the same goes in the UK. Ultra-processed foods literally make up half of dietary energy, and the UK ranks third globally in terms of ultra-processed food sales. And the sobering statistic here was that British children consume more ultra-processed foods than in all of Europe and make a total of 65% of their dietary intake from ultra-processed foods. So if someone wants to shift and say, oh, I want to follow a vegan diet, you're going to have to make that shift in a way that's not just eliminating animal products, but also addressing some of the other foods and items that are consumed along the way. There's now enough research to suggest that these ultra-processed foods are literally addictive. They meet the criteria for being addictive, just like tobacco and other substances. Our brain responds very strongly to highly processed food, which is why we can't get enough. We have a commercial over here for Lay's potato chips that used to say we can't just eat one, and there's a reason why. It's difficult to just have a little bit of these because they just generate and stimulate so many responses in the brain, good dopamine like feelings that you want to continue to do that. And so we have to be aware that all of these exist out there in the food environment that can make it challenging to reach that optimal vegan diet status. So said another way, maintaining a Western style diet minus animal products is not going to meet the definition to strive for reaching optimal nutrition. So we need to go a little bit more. We need to actually educate ourselves to learn what to look out for. And it's not simply a matter of just eliminating a few things, but it's also the addition. As I'll show, the data in the United States and elsewhere for fruit and vegetable intake is it's really poor. Only about 1 in 10 Americans are actually meeting their vegetable intake. So it's also about learning how to add more fruits and vegetables and other constituents of a healthy vegan diet. The difference between the perception of nutrition between physicians and dietitians often contradicts each other. And a lot of this is due to marketing or lack of nutrition information. And I threw this article advertisement from a well-known dietitian nutrition magazine here in the States that actually shows the misinformation that's being presented to dietitians. This article here is on deli meat. Actually, it's known already to be an unhealthy product. You know, processed meats now meet the criteria according to the World Health Organization to be a class 1 carcinogen, along with asbestos and other cancer-causing products out there. Meat itself is a probable cancer stage 2 carcinogen. Yet advertisements like this, who actually slight vegetarians, are trying to convince professionals that this is acceptable. And I quote, deli meats are pre-cooked convenient sources of protein. In fact, the iron and zinc are more bioavailable than vegetarian sources. And processed simply means prepared. So a lot of misinformation done in terms of marketing. And if professionals are receiving this and then communicating this to patients that want to shift to a vegetarian diet, this could be more challenging. To show what's happening in US households in terms of purchases being out of sync with what the USDA recommendations are, the yellow bars are recommended levels. The blue indicate what is actually being purchased. And unfortunately, when we look at things like refined grains and sugar and starches, Americans are buying well past what the recommend levels should be. And on the opposite spectrum, for the healthier foods like legumes and dark green leafy vegetables, Americans are buying very few. So again, it's important to recognize this when someone wants to shift to a healthier diet. There's already the existence of a lot of hurdles that need to be addressed. Literally 10% of US adults are meeting the level of intake for vegetables, only about 12% meeting the level of servings for fruits. So really low numbers there. And it's not just quantity, but also quality. Half of the vegetable intake that Americans consume comes from potatoes or tomatoes. And most of that comes from fried potatoes or potato chips or pizza or pasta sauce. So it's quality, not just quantity, that is also important. And this slide essentially says more of the same, that most Americans are consuming potatoes and tomatoes, or on the side of fruits, it's mostly oranges and apples. So what we're seeing here is a real lack of diversity and variety in fruits and vegetable products, and we need to recognize that. Lastly, I wanted to talk about the psychological or readiness to make big changes like diet. And I like to often use Prochaska's model of stages of readiness. This was a behavioral or addictive behavior model that came up, and it's very applicable to any large change, particularly those who find shifting to a new dietary regimen challenging. Because if you're in the contemplation or pre-contemplation phase and you're not quite ready to take action, no amount of pamphlets or facts or discussion or videos or documentaries will really help the individual be successful in long-term maintenance of that change until they're in that readiness phase. So this is also something to assess individually about where someone's at, how ready are they to make a shift. And it could be as easy as breaking this down into, okay, maybe let's just focus only on increasing fruits and vegetables in your diet. Don't worry about all the rest of the other plant-based components that make up a whole food plant-based diet. Let's just take one quartile. When we're successful with that, maybe we'll add others and take it in a piecemeal fashion. So meeting a patient or an individual at where they are cannot be emphasized enough. As if to add more challenges to individuals, recently we had the COVID-19 epidemic come out, and during this pandemic, many Americans and those in the UK struggled with mental health, which actually relates to how they made their decisions in terms of dietary choices. Interestingly, in the UK, the data suggested that there was a reduction in animal products, and many individuals tried meat-based alternatives, and many said that they would continue with those meat-based alternatives. And some of the top reasons were because of health and the environment that had to do with COVID-19. In the States, there was less decrease in choosing healthy foods, a decrease in selecting vegetables and whole grains, very sobering. The dietary habits, exercise habits, the management of chronic diseases all went in the wrong direction during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is far from over, by the way. However, there's some positive news, and this has to do with plant-based diets, vegan diets. There's been several articles now, population studies actually, that suggest that those who follow plant-based diets will result in a decreased risk for COVID-19 and a decreased severity of COVID-19. So several studies have come out looking at that, which is a really nice incentive to those that want to shift to a plant-based diet. You have that extra added benefit working for you. The last consideration that I wanted to talk about today is when meeting a patient or an individual with where they are why they chose to follow a vegan diet, because there are differences. And this is a study that looked at those who selected veganism for ethical reasons and those that selected it for health reasons. And it turns out that those who selected it for health reasons had larger intakes of vegetables and fruit, whereas the ethical intake of fruits and vegetables still met the recommended levels for vegetables, but didn't meet that for fruits. And so understanding why an individual wants to make this shift are important. The overall intakes were good. However, it's important to recognize where people got their information to determine why they wanted to make the change. All this to say is what I like to consider, are we underestimating the power of the studies that are looking at plant-based vegan diets right now? With all of these caveats out there, many of these caveats already exist in the studies that looked at those who are following vegan diets. And oftentimes, even the classification of those individuals in these studies is somewhat blurry. There's studies that say, oh, I'm a vegetarian, I check the box as a vegetarian, but I eat fish once or twice a week. So there's also some misclassification going on. And so as we help educate the public about the benefits of shifting to a plant-based vegan diet, it's also important to recognize that when that happens, we should start seeing the increased benefits in research studies that come out looking at these diets. And I think that's really important because we already saw the power in the research of those who follow these diets, but that power could be increased so much more when we start to focus on following a whole food plant-based diet and minimally processed items in that diet. And there's a lot of research to prove this now. So many studies have come out looking at those who follow plant-based diets with healthy plant-based foods and those who follow plant-based diets with unhealthy plant-based foods. And the evidence continues to pile in to suggest the benefits when you're actually not including processed foods in plant-based diets, and the detriment for those that actually include those. And a study just came out actually at the UK Biobank study that looked at individuals following plant-based diets for the last 12 years, so it's relatively current. Those that were following unhealthy plant-based diets had a significant increase in type 2 diabetes of the magnitude of 25%. Those following plant-based diets that were relatively healthy composition did not have that risk at all. So it's important to recognize that just because we go plant-based does not necessarily guarantee success in obtaining an optimal vegan diet. My last slide of the day is about dietary guidelines, because we do have a lot of support and resources to guide individuals in reaching and striving for optimal vegan diets. And even the simple Choose My Plate, from the United States, if you look at it, it's already mostly plant-based. So with a few different switches and adoptions, you can actually turn this plate into a great whole foods vegan diet guideline. And over in the UK, for the Eat Well guide, the nonprofit plant-based health professionals UK have come out with a really nice plant-based Eat Well guide. This is downloadable on the web. It really shows how to plan a whole foods plant-based diet that's minimal in processed foods and maximizes nutrients and health. My personal challenge when I changed to a vegetarian and a vegan diet was what I also hear from a lot of patients that I counsel, which is, I don't know what to do with vegetables. I don't know how to cook them. And my trick of the trade has been really educating and learning about healthy seasonings that can be herbs and spices. I like to use nutritional yeast. I like to use Bragg's or coconut aminos to replace soy sauce. And I also like to use balsamic vinegar. You can dribble and sprinkle all these types of things on top of fresh vegetables or freshly steamed vegetables. And it's a really easier way to adopt and integrate more fruit vegetable intake in your diet, because half of your plate really should be fruits and vegetables. Dr. McDougall has an excellent resource if you want to learn how to make sauces and dressings. And I'm sure, Marlene, you probably mentioned this in your book that you came out with, some fantastic recipes that actually adhere to this principle to maximize whole food plant-based dietary recipes. So that's the conclusion of my talk, and I hope that I provided some good information to help us understand why following a vegan diet really has an amazing effect on your health, but also striving towards an optimal vegan diet with recognition of some of the known caveats that are out there. It can really feel like it's a tidal wave because the food environment, the food system, is not actually designed right now to optimize our health. And so we have to be, we have to recognize that when food companies produce food products, they don't have as their number one goal the health of the consumer in mind. They have profit. That's a no-brainer. But there are ways to combine those, and we're seeing more and more food companies recognize that we can come out with a healthy product, and we can actually serve our bottom line as well. So thank you for your attention to this talk today.
Oh, thank you, Tim.
Yeah,
Sure.
that was
Yeah.
fantastic, fantastic. If
Really.
you could just finish sharing your slides, then we can get back on the screen together. And I'm sure like you will have taken a few notes here. First of all, the psychological aspect, you just hit the nail on the head, Tim. People need help. And there's not a lot of people that can just go boom, boom. So we developed 4 weeks to vegan, which we find has huge success. Week 1, they learn 7 breakfasts. Week 2, they learn 7 mains. Week 3, they learn 7 sides or snacks.
Mhm.
And week 4, they learn 7 desserts. So they have 28 recipes that they can live with and learn to cook. And what you were saying is so important. People are lost, they don't know what to do, and that's why the Human Ecology Project, for us, we want to put as much as we can online so people can come on live with us and actually be in the kitchen with me and learn how to do these things. So that's the next phase we've been at. The other thing, well, there was lots of things. That was a very powerful presentation.
Yeah, really great.
The description of
Thank
the
you again.
omega-6 that you have is fantastic. Omega-6 for omnivores or omega-6. People don't understand that. They demonize omega-6 completely, and they don't understand that you do need it as well. So I absolutely love the way you explained the difference between where the omega-6 is coming from.
Yeah, it's really important because what I find happen is, and even in the field of plant-based professionals, there's a lot of regurgitation of what somebody else said without doing an adequate deep dive into the topic. And that's what I attempted to do, because I wasn't convinced that everybody should be taking a DHA supplement. And so I wanted to understand the research and be able to share that research of what my findings were. And you're so absolutely right. The demonization of omega-6 is just unfounded. And it really is only applicable to those who follow omnivorous diets, where animal products like eggs and meats are concentrated sources of arachidonic acid, which is what leads to pro-inflammation. And inflammation, by the way, is not a bad thing. If we injure ourselves or we get in a car accident, we want our body's inflammation process to work for us, which is why too much omega-3 actually can be deleterious. This is why the US military has found concern that for going out in the field, they don't want soldiers to bleed easily. They want the inflammation process to occur rapidly. And this is why if you go in for an operation at the hospital, they're going to say, are you on fish oil supplements? Get off those supplements, because we don't want bleeding time to be affected. So you can already see there's some kind of an unnatural state from taking these supplements, because they're not necessary and they offset the delicate balance that is already provided for us in our body. So thank you for mentioning that.
In fact, you've just reminded me, because I'll post the link from that fantastic article and video that you done for us quite a while back. It's on the website, and I'll post that link on here as well. Bill, I was thinking back to the 60s when Tim was talking about, what was happening back then with the revolution in Whole Foods, and Bill used to sell short grain brown rice in brown paper bags under the counter. They were bringing it in from Japan, and it wasn't even sort of, the thing to do at that time.
For the revolution, right? The revolution.
Right.
It's interesting though, because I think there's so much, and that's one of the things that was great about your presentation here, and all of our advisory board members, when they've been on, have addressed this issue in one way or another, and that is that there is so much contradictory, and there's so much information about nutrition.
Yeah.
There's probably been more nutritional information published in the last 15 years than there has in centuries before.
Right.
You know? And it's like people are trying to mix and match and figure out what suits their already decided preferences. You know, I mean,
Exactly. Cherry
we've got an
pick.
interesting thing happening within macrobiotics now. There's been a kind of a there's a small number of people who have all of a sudden discovered meat. And when they started eating meat, they put meat back in their diet and they feel fantastic, right? They feel
Right.
fantastic. And to address the issue that maybe they weren't eating a healthy diet before they started eating the meat is a very difficult bridge to pass, you know, because they're
It
eating
is.
a concept of a diet over here. And I think, I don't know whether you agree or not, but sometimes people can do something that we would consider to be nutritionally harmful, but if it creates a change in their body, there may be a reduction in symptoms, right? It doesn't necessarily mean
Right.
a full therapeutic effect, but there is kind of a therapeutic boost that comes from it.
Sure, sure. And there's I think it's also psychologically related that when you make a shift into something that is the norm, after all, 90% of individuals in pretty much any country are consuming meat. And,
Yeah.
and when you shift back to that, there's a feeling of, well, I'm doing what everybody else is doing. The herd is the place where there's safety. So if I go back to that, the recidivism rate is always something that I find very, very interesting because it's so tempting and so easy to revert back to what everybody else is doing. It's more culturally acceptable. When you go out to parties or events or colleagues and coworkers, you're already fitting in. I'll never forget when I went out into the corporate world back in the 1990s. We went to a restaurant, and I was among all these executives, primarily who were men, white men. And the first topic is sports. Oh, how about those Chargers or this or that? And I literally had to fake it because I wasn't a sports guy. I'm not a big fan of, going back to the gladiator Coliseum days where grown men hit each other and throw around a pigskin ball and get concussions. And I actually had to be like, oh yeah, I think those Chargers are right. And I totally had it wrong because it was basketball, not football. And I was like, you need to be careful here. All to say, the point is, fitting in is so much easier
Yeah.
when you do what's culturally accepted. And the good news is the expansion of plant-based diets, the awareness and link of plant-based diets to the environment and climate change are all helping to propel individuals to feel more confident in staying with that diet. And then individuals like us who devote our lives to helping people make that switch in a healthy way and don't do it but for earning a dime. We need more individuals like us that make that commitment and share that information in a non-biased way. Because the other piece of this is you can go on Twitter or any social media site and you have purported experts that are going to tell you that staying away from legumes because of lectins
Yeah.
are the way to go, or
Yeah.
any other nutritional misinformation. So it's really hard to sift through the weeds. I have a lot of empathy for individuals that are trying to navigate this nutritional world. It's
Yeah.
a challenge.
I
It
think
seems
what
like it's, oftentimes an overcomplication. I think that, if you look at what you've been saying and what we've been saying for a long time, there really is a tremendous simplicity to this. It's
Mm,
not, you don't have to have a degree in nutritional science to eat good food, and to have a balanced diet. But people get hooked up in one particular thing or another. It's like one month
Right.
it's coconuts, and the next month it's avocados, and so things have these magical qualities. And so the whole arena of magical thinking is very attractive. I think to people they're looking for something, the silver bullet. What's the silver bullet? What can I take
Yeah.
one thing and that's going to do it all for me?
I mean, the thing, we have such a diverse group of clients that come for health issues, and no one's ever come and said, I'd like to go vegan for the animals, They always come because they've got cancer or heart disease or diabetes or whatever. No one's ever come and said, I'd like to help and go vegan for the environment. It's always about health. But that's okay, because what happens is once they're in that space, they never escape us anyway, Tim, So we teach
Right.
them about, ecology with connecting the dots. Look, connect the dots here. Food is central to everything: animals, environmental health, your health, climate change, everything, nutrition. So we feel that putting together the Human Ecology Project has probably been the best work we feel we've done in 100 years combined teaching. And we know we'll get funding eventually, because we're looking at ways to start getting applications put out. And then we can offer loads of resources online here for people to come on that don't have the money to have counselling and don't have money for, cooking and nutrition classes. And the other thing I'm hugely passionate about is people are addicted, as you said, Tim. People are addicted to junk food. It's very real. And like cigarettes, like alcohol, like drugs, whatever. So, that Freedom from Cravings ebook that we put out for free, it really does help them understand and, connect with dopamine. And it's not just them, there's opioids and cheese, and it's a very real thing. So when we can kind of get them to take a step at a time, we do have really great success. Then once they've lifted the veil, and they've actually looked at what drives me is the animal kingdom, right? When they've looked behind the curtain, they can't pretend not to see what's there, you see? So then they become sort of virtuous, evangelical, more evangelical than me even. But
Yeah.
as we all know, it starts with the food in your plate. And Bill and I, we feel what we have, what we receive from teaching this work is incredible health, vitality, unbelievable passion. And that's what we want to give to the next person, and then give it to their families. It's not about, oh my God, that tofu, this or tofu, that. Once people taste the food, they're hooked. My food.
Yeah.
Seriously, they really get it, And
I think that's one of the biggest things, is demystifying the whole, well, this is too much trouble to cook the food, because that's, and the expense thing. There's two big bugbears there, it's expensive, and it's, of course, sometimes those are just excuses for staying away, but, it's a big challenge.
Yeah, I mean, it is, and in demystifying some of those misconceptions are really important. I just saw another study that was just published this past week about the food cost of following a vegan diet for those who had diabetes. Turned out to be much less than the dietary purchase they were already making.
Absolutely.
And these preconceptions, we need to strike these down one at a time, consistently, uniformly, until they're eradicated. Because, and I use that strong verbiage because, these things are actually harming individuals, and if they think they're doing the right thing, but they're inadvertently harming themselves, it's sad. And this is why I literally every year for the last 15 years, I present at conferences, because providing information that's not biased and that's objective and what the science is saying ends up leading people coming up to my podium saying, you know what, I'm going to make the change right now, or I was vegetarian, I'm going to go vegan now. Because it's hard to get that information. You have to learn how to dig to get it. And your point, Marlene, about the connection to the animal world, it couldn't be said better. As Paul McCarthy used to say, if slaughterhouses were made of glass windows, everybody would become a vegetarian. And I love that comment that he made so many moons ago. because we don't live in, let's just say 70 to 75% of us live in urban city areas. We don't know what's happening at the slaughterhouse. We don't understand that these chicken coops produce odor and noxious gases and methane that when the winds blow hurt the people that are in the areas there. In my own state with hog farming, where there's more hogs per capita than there are people, this manure and excrement and methane is extremely toxic. And lawsuits have been successfully filed against these companies for literally harming health of individuals that are down headwind from these. You know, it's a horrific problem. We get a hurricane that comes through here. Guess where all that excrement that was contained goes? Right out into the ocean. And then we start to see fish with flesh-eating parts of their body because of a microbe called Pisteria that shouldn't ordinarily be there in the water is now there because of these leeches. So there's just so many downsides to animal agriculture. But again, my point is we're very removed from that. And I welcome companies like Netflix. I say Netflix is doing our marketing for us because some of the documentaries, particularly young folks now, who respond better to watching things visually than folks like us who are able to put on our glasses and weed through what a research journal has to say. These documentaries do a wonderful job of presenting life as it really truly is out there on the farm. This is not some old McDonald farm in a red barn where each animal has its individual stall. You know, these animals are deprived of natural mechanisms and sunlight. A great documentary just came out called The Twin Study over at Stanford University. Also details what was like for a North Carolina chicken rancher and why he shifted. Very highly recommended.
Well, I've always told people if they want to know about where their food comes from, they need to get off the interstate in America. If you take the back roads, you come across horror shows. I mean, all the time you start saying, "What that smell? You know, what's that smell? Or what? Oh my God Almighty! Look at how many cattle they've got on that one little field." You know, I mean, it's just incredible. I remember when I first started traveling and was in the natural foods business in the 60s, you know, we used to go looking for people who were growing organically because there wasn't really any organic growing movement on tap, you know, but there were people who were growing organically and just didn't know it. You know, I mean, there were people that just weren't using any chemicals on their field, you know, and usually like third, fourth generation farmers. You know, and finding those people, you had to come across these horror shows, you know, to get there.
I mean,
it's true. Go ahead, Marlene.
No, I was just wanting to say I don't want to get into too much of the metaphysical, but you know, a big concern for me is as well the depression and the mental health that's going on in the world. And if you think, we all know that our spiritual health is critically connected to our food choices. And when I think about, you know, eating animals equating to the misery, the fear, the pain, the adrenaline, despair of what these creatures have suffered and endured, and people are taking that in to their psyche. So a part of what we teach our students and our clients, that if they're cooking food, eating plants, it's imbued with loving kindness, right? There's no torture there. And I swear their energy changes, they become more joyful. So I think that's another big thing that we have to keep sort of pushing out there as well, you know, taking in that fear and pain and adrenaline. I mean, you know, there's beautiful things going on in the world, but there's so much mental health, real big problems. So, you know, sorry, I went off on a rant there. I was just thinking, you know, we need to work harder. We need to get more people involved. We need to get people feeling excited about having a purpose in their life. And for me, the biggest purpose is every day, what do you do with your life when you get up? You know, what are your choices to eat? That's the most important thing that I have to always share.
Yeah, well said, Marlene. And it has such wide-ranging benefits that expand beyond your own personal, you know, reality. you know, you made me think of when I was in Europe, and I was studying at École Hotelière in Lausanne, Switzerland, and the professor that was putting on these courses decided it would be helpful for us to visit a slaughterhouse to understand, since we were future hotel restaurant managers, it was important for us to understand where, you know, kind of meat is processed. And he couldn't have been worse. He couldn't have made a worse decision, because here we are, you know, these college kids, and we go to the entrance of the slaughterhouse. We see these cows being lined up. We see bolts being put in their head. We've seen chainsaws opening up the carcass. We see vats of eyeballs and whatever. You know, one college student just ran out and vomited instantly because it's that dramatic. It's so stressful. And you start getting a taste of how things really actually are. And it's like the Matrix. You know, this is very, very uncomfortable. And, you know, that is part of the journey. As you adopt a vegan diet, you're going to naturally be exposed to some of these things. But would you rather dwell in reality, or would you rather dwell in ignorance? And, you know, the answer is obvious. You know, it's better to feel a little uncomfortable, but also know that your dietary decision isn't participating in that. And so if there's anything called karma, you're going to be on the winning side of karma, because you're not going to come back as a slaughterhouse animal.
Yeah. And I think we're all on the winning side of history, because more and more people are moving towards what we're doing here. I could actually talk to you forever, but we're out of time now. Bill, have you got any other questions for Tim?
Well, I know that we're all moving in the right direction, because there's so many people who are vehemently opposed to veganism now. I mean, vehemently opposed. Just, you know, they're coming for our meat, you know, and they're blazing tradition, you know, like, I mean, the more of that you see, the more you realize, oh, there's some buttons being pushed here, you know. This is not just a collegial discussion between people about what's healthy and what's not healthy, or what's right ecologically and what's not right ecologically. This is hitting some deep nerves, right? Very deep nerves.
And deep profits as well. So when I see a billboard that puts up non-dairy milks, and the billboard's put out by the dairy industry, and it says, not a natural milk, you know, this is not real milk, you know, you're pressing buttons, because it's entering into their market share, and their market share is dwindling. Here in the States, literally half of the quote dairy case is devoted to non-dairy milks. I don't know how it is in the UK.
It's probably similar.
You're going in that direction. Yeah.
Well, that was absolutely wonderful. I know the students enjoy the
really lovely talking to you.
Million thanks for all
you.
what you put into that. It was really fantastic, and we will look forward to connecting with you again soon. So enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for what you both do for the Human Ecology Project. You know, keep moving forward, and thank you for all of those efforts.
Nothing else to do.
Thank you.